So, this is actually take 3 of this video. Today I've learned that you really need to pay attention to the battery when you're filming, and I've also come to suspect that you will make when you're making videos, your absolute best take will be while the camera is not in fact filming. So, take 3. What we're going to talk about today is just a quick discussion on body types, and what I'm going to do is introduce the subject, kind of how it's sort of classically thought of, and then we're going to look at some, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the subject. So, so starting out, there's the concept of, and again, pronunciation ain't my superpower, so I want to say somatotypes, but it's not right. I think I've said somatotypes for 20 years. But I don't know if you can hear this.
Somatotype.
Somatotype is the way it's supposed to be pronounced. Anyway, somatotypes are basically just a classification of body types that are very general. And the concept was put forth back in the 1940s by a doctor named William H. Sheldon. So, and generally, from what I understand, it was based off bone structure, muscularity, and body fat. I think bone structure is probably the most reliable indicator of the 3 body types. Muscularity is something that you have to be sort of careful with because it's something that can change a lot. And body fat, I think, is one that is probably misunderstood or misrepresented a lot, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So, one thing about these body types is I think for most people, well, one thing it's important to understand is a lot of people are a mix of more than one. Some people can even have classifications from 3 of them. So you want to be careful about generalizing, whether you're again, if you're sort of part of the general public and you're trying to figure out the best way to train for yourself, or if you are a trainer or a coach and you're trying to isolate ways to train your clients or students or whatever, be careful with this because I think it's real easy to generalize and categorize. I think this can be a good place to start, but when you're looking at people, I think when you're trying to categorize these things, you need to kind of be able to identify where somebody was at their peak. So I think it's more important to determine if somebody has an athletic background or not. So obviously if we're talking about like student athletes, they're athletes, so you don't need to worry about that. But if you're talking about somebody who is part of the general public, maybe someone who's in their 30s, 40s, 50s or whatever, I think determining if they have an athletic background is more important than kind of wondering what their body type is like. Anytime I start training a new client, I will always start with very general programs at first, unless they're a competitive athlete, obviously, but if they're just general public, if they're part of the general public, I'll start with very broad things, and then as they go and I look at what they're doing, I'll narrow things down if it's appropriate. Some people don't need a lot of specificity, some people do. So, but anyway, it's also important, I think, to understand that within each of these categories that we're about to get into, there can be outliers. So be cautious about, like, as I talk about what generally makes someone an ectomorph or an endomorph or a mesomorph, you may very well know somebody or have heard of someone who could be categorized as one of those that had qualities that were like outside of the scope of what's normal. Just keep in mind, outliers are fine, but it's don't base how you're going to approach training, whether it's for you or for somebody else, off of what you know about an outlier. Okay, if you're training clients, you should always be evaluating how they're doing and how they're adapting and doing things that are appropriate for them. If you're one of those trainers who does very cookie cutter stuff where like all your clients do the same thing on Monday, you won't like my channel, let's just put it that way. You should just go watch unboxing hauls or something. Anyway, so starting off with ectomorphs, generally speaking, they tend to be very lean appearing people. kind of smaller frames. They might be tall and kind of long. Generally, ectomorphs are people that are going to be, from an athletic standpoint, they're going to be drawn to more endurance type activities. They might actually enjoy endurance type activities where some of the other types won't. But they tend to be good at cardio, good endurance athletes. Often they're good artists. Some of them are good musicians. Sometimes they're drawn to things like yoga. And again, we're generalizing, but generally these are people that do not carry a lot of muscle mass. They might have a difficult time gaining weight. They can gain weight and they can build muscle, but they have to be trained the right way. And it's just a different path for them than it is for the other body types. So generally speaking, ectomorphs don't respond very well to intensity. And when I say intensity, I'm talking about percentage of load. So I'm not saying the workout was hard. I'm saying that they don't respond as well to things that are close to like a 1 rep max. Okay, they're going to do better with higher rep ranges, and they tend to do, like if they're trying to put on size, they need things like giant sets where you might have like 3 to 5 exercises in a row that are fatiguing the same muscle group, and you're doing a lot of reps. So it's we're not going to get into a lot of detail about that today, but just an ectomorph can build muscle. They need something different than an endomorph or a mesomorph. Ectomorphs also tend to do better on higher carbohydrate diets than the other body types. They just do, especially if they're trying to put on size, if they're trying to build muscle. They're going to need more carbs than the other types. One thing about ectomorphs that tricks people, this is one reason why I said I don't think body fat is as accurate of a predictor of body type, is a lot of ectomorphs are skinny fat. So they might look small, but if you measure their body fat, the body fat might actually be higher than people would think. So skinny fat is a real thing. You see that a lot with people that, a lot of endurance athletes, a lot of people who even run marathons, their body fat is a lot higher than people realize. Some of that's because they underfeed, and because they do so much cardio, their cortisol levels are high, makes the body want to store fat. So some of them are lean, but a lot of them their body fat's a lot higher than people realize. The next category we're going to touch on real quick is endomorphs. Endomorphs are naturally larger or more shapely, is another way to put it. They tend to be good power athletes in general. So like a shot putter will typically be more of like an endomorph than the other two categories. Linebackers, that sort of thing. Probably belly dancers. Again, generalizing. Endomorphs are going to respond better to intensity than ectomorphs. So what that means is just in general, they're going to respond better to higher percentage of load than an ectomorph will. General terms. That's also training age is going to be a big factor there too, and I'm not going to get into training age today, but this is just general terms. So endomorphs are more likely to have a higher body fat percentage than the other two types, but that doesn't mean they can't be lean. They'll always be bigger than the other two as far as like, broader, and with girls typically like larger hips. But that doesn't mean that they can't have like a healthy or an athletic body fat percentage. They might have to try harder, and they probably will have a more difficult time getting very lean compared to especially like an ectomorph. But they can do it. They just got to be real deliberate about it. So one thing is endomorphs sometimes will do better on a higher on a higher fat diet than an ectomorph or a mesomorph will. That's general terms. Not going to dig into that a lot there. It's just generally they can do better on a higher fat diet. That doesn't mean they need to go like a real high fat diet, and I'm not saying to subsist off bacon. Just generally that higher fat can be better for them. And let's see, I think that's all I'm going to say right there. Mesomorphs are naturally muscular and lean. They tend to make good baseball players, wide receivers, that sort of thing. They can be good in weightlifting and powerlifting within their weight class. So typically like your endomorphs will be good powerlifters, but they'll obviously be in like the higher weight classes. But Mesomorphs can do fine in their weight class, which will obviously be lighter than an endo. In general, mesomorphs they respond to broader adaptations, broader nutritional options, and their body fat can range a lot. They can have high body fat, they can have low body fat. Part of that is going to depend on training age, and part of that's going to look at where they're at in life as well. So now, these things are all fine, and it's really easy to kind of categorize people. So capping that real quick, ectomorphs in general, naturally kind of on the skinny side, tended to be more drawn towards endurance type sports or things like yoga. Endomorphs tend to be larger people, and they're more suited typically towards power sports. Mesomorphs, typically kind of naturally athletic, what people would think of as athletic looking. They're going to have more muscle on average, and most of the time their body fat's going to be not as high. But that just depends on their lifestyle. There's a lot of variables there. Each one of these categories can be a very good athlete if they want to, or they can pursue athletic things. It's just a matter of understanding what they're good at and giving them appropriate stuff. Or, if you're looking at yourself, it's identifying what you respond to well and what you enjoy. And sometimes these things are surprising. When I've put clients on, even clients who are part of the general public, who were not athletic, when I put them on an intensity phase, and they're the loads are heavier for them and the average rest period is longer, I've had several clients who were surprised that they really enjoyed that type of training more than they enjoyed like the kind of typical real short rest period, a lot of reps thing. But they had probably before that thought was what exercise was supposed to be about. So that's all fine. We can look at that. As you progress, so again, when I start a new client, I'm always going to start them with fairly general things. I always start people with what's known as an accumulation phase or a volume phase. And then I'll go into an intensity phase after that, and then I'll go back and forth between the two. As the client progresses, what that means is going to change. But one of the things I'm going to look at is just how they respond. And when I say how they respond, I guess if you're going to categorize that, it's one thing is going to be when I'm training people, I'm paying very close attention to how much weight they use and how many reps they get within what I've prescribed. Okay, you have to understand how rep brackets are supposed to work. Maybe I'll do a video on that, but not today. I want to keep today shorter. Let's see. This is a good place for a cut while I collect my thoughts. Get some more coffee. Almost out of coffee, that's tragic. Okay, where was I? Okay, so, when I talk about respond well, that can be kind of fairly nuanced. So some of that means if people are getting stronger within the strength quality that we're training, that means they're adapting. It can also mean their satisfaction with the workout can also be part of that, because you can kind of pay attention to what people like, what people don't like. Some people really like to feel a burn. They like short rest periods. Although some of that can be psychological because they think that they need to just go all the time. That can be a problem, in my opinion, because there are times to train like that. There's times in training like that can not be healthy. If someone has a lot of stress, that kind of training can be counterproductive. If someone has a lot of fast twitch fibers, that training can actually make them injury prone if you do it enough. I'm not saying everything has its place, but so generally speaking, as I'm training someone and we're going along, I'm kind of mentally collecting data on if I think they're fast twitch or slow twitch dominant. So super general terms, if they're fast twitch dominant, they're going to produce more force. They're not going to have as much of an endurance type of qualities. Now this is something that can vary though, not just from person to person, but from muscle group to muscle group. So somebody, as an example, they may have fast twitch biceps and the quads typically will be like slower twitch in most people. So most people can handle, let's see, most clients you can put them on a leg press and give them an appropriate weight and tell them to just do it for a minute with a given tempo. And you can find a weight where they'll do that and they'll adapt to that and they'll do well for that, because the quads, or most people's quads, have enough slow twitch fibers to handle that type of thing. But you will have some clients, or there are some people who they're going to do much, they're not going to respond well to that. They need heavier loads and less reps. An intensity phase for someone who does have more fast twitch fibers is going to be somewhere from like 1 to 5 repetitions, and you can break that down further. But that's going to be an intensity phase for them, just to give that some kind of definition. If somebody has a lot of slow twitch fibers, they're going to generally enjoy shorter rest periods, lighter loads, and an intensity phase for them might be 6 to 8 reps. So again, this isn't, we're not doing a cert here, but this is just general terms. If I had someone who has never lifted weights before, I'm not going to start them with an intensity phase. Okay, we're going to start with an accumulation phase. We're going to start with a volume phase. The reps are going to be higher. As they progress, they will do an intensity phase, but depending on their background, an intensity phase for a beginner, I might decide that's 10 to 12 reps. Now, an intensity phase for someone who's highly qualified, it might be 1 to 3 reps. That's obviously not most of the population, but when you're dealing with athletes, that's depending on the sport and the time of the off season, there's factors there. So, all right, I feel like I'm kind of in the weeds a bit, but so the reason I brought up fiber dominance is kind of regardless of what you think your body type or their body type is, it's something you need to pay attention to, because again, there are certain muscle groups like the rectus abdominis. Most people tends to be fast twitch. That means that doing 100 crunches is a waste of time. You're going to respond better with crunches as far as development, with heavier resistance and less reps. And that is why we have Swiss balls, which when I started training were like essential. And now, one I've been in gyms recently, nobody really understands what they're for. You'll see people doing crunches on them, but I haven't seen anyone doing weighted crunches on a Swiss ball unless they were training with me in probably more than 10 years. So, and that's just, again, the rectus abdominis, it's a fast twitch muscle. And most people. I would don't train that on a machine, because most of your machines, they're hinge based, which means it's kind of that whole range of motion. They're trying to put it on just like a one point, which is really bad for your back. So when you do things like crunches on a Swiss ball, it has a lot of benefits, but it also, part of it is it allows your spine to curve naturally and doesn't focus that flexion on a part of your spine that the lumbar that's really not supposed to flex. So the knee flexors are also muscles that tend to be fast twitch. So most people on like a leg curl machine, they're going to get better results with like 6 to 8 reps or less than they are going to be with like 15 or 20 reps. If I start a new client, I'll usually start them with like 10 to 12 reps just to get used to the movement. But after they've done it a bit, I'm going to bring that average rep count down a lot. With all this, I think it's really important to understand the stretch shortening cycle. So you need to understand how muscles and tendons work together to produce force. If you do not know what the stretch shortening cycle is, you probably need to get off of YouTube or Rumble and get onto Human Kinetics or a similar website and buy a textbook and do some reading. Okay, because if you don't understand the stretch shortening cycle, understanding how a lot of these things work is going to be very difficult for you. So study that. Basic quick description is when I do any kind of athletic movement, my tendons work in conjunction with my muscles to produce force. Okay, so the tendons do how do I want to put this? Depending on the movement, I mean, sometimes the tendons are doing a lot more work than people realize. It's not just the muscle. Sometimes when you're trying to develop a muscle, you need to work around the stretch shortening cycle to put more stress on the muscle. But you have to be careful about that if you're dealing with athletes, because you don't want to detrain the stretch shortening cycle. But if you understand how it works, and you understand how tempo works, there's certain things you can do to put more stress on the muscle belly and put less stress on the tendon to make the muscle do a little more work if you're trying to develop it. So, easy example, sometimes if we look at the bicep, guys who have a pretty easy time developing like a large muscle, they will have a very long muscle belly and a very short tendon. Some of these guys that have really big arms, if you look at them, it'll almost look like their bicep crosses their elbow. It's that big, it's like that muscle belly is that long, and that tendon is that short. So some people are structured like that. Some people will have they'll have a longer tendon and a shorter muscle belly. That's me and my bicep. I've got a longer tendon, short muscle. I've never built up like a very large bicep, but I can curl a lot of weight relative to the cross-sectional size of my arm, and also relative to people that are bigger than me. So that tendon length is really important. Another area this comes into play a lot is with the calf muscle. Okay, so one of the reasons a lot of people have a difficult time developing an aesthetically pleasing calf muscle is because the Achilles tendon is very, very good at storing elastic energy because of the stretch shortening cycle that we touched on a minute ago. So when you get to the bottom portion of that exercise, if you're just doing either like a seated calf or a standing calf or whatever, and you get to the bottom portion and then you just go back up, that tendon is doing a lot of the work, not the muscle. So the way to work around that is to get to the bottom of that range of motion and pause for somewhere between 2 and 6 seconds and then go back up. If you have never done that, it will feel very strange, but it allows that elastic energy to dissipate and it puts more stress on the muscle. Obviously pausing for 6 seconds on the bottom, that's a long time. It makes for very long sets. But even a 2-second pause, I think, can let some of that energy dissipate and put more stress on the muscle. Now, if you're looking at someone who has what's called a high calf, where that Achilles tendon is very long, these will be people like sprinters, a lot of track and field athletes, jumpers, probably basketball players too, actually. People that are good at jumping or sprinting, a lot of them will have a very long tendon and a short muscle belly. So they will sometimes appear to have like really small calves. The truth is just that muscle is really close to the joint because of the way they're structured. That's part of the reason why they're good at sprinting and good at running. I'm sorry, good at sprinting and good at jumping, and probably not so good at like endurance type running. People who have a longer muscle belly and a shorter tendon, they might be good at other stuff, but they're typically not going to be great at sprinting and jumping, generally. But in not any of those cases, when you're trying to develop the calf muscle, part of what you need to do is pause on the bottom, let some of that elastic energy dissipate, and then go up and proceed with your set. So again, I feel like my best take was while I was talking to a camera that was not filming, but hopefully this at least introduced the idea of body types and how they can function. The last thing I guess I want to say is if you're looking at ectomorphs, endomorphs, and mesomorphs, as they progress, just pay attention to what they seem to like and what they don't seem to like, because you might think somebody has a lot of slow twitch fibers and then discover that they actually have fast twitch fibers. Or they might have fast twitch fibers within like a certain, movement or muscle that you need to identify. And part of the reason that's important is because if you have someone who has a high percentage of fast twitch fibers and you train them like they're slow twitch, you're going to make them injury prone. So a lot of athletes that are injury prone, who have a lot of problems, like structural problems, it's because sometimes that could be their nutrition, because if they're eating in a pro-inflammatory way, it'll drive their inflammation up and make injuries worse. But it can also be a factor of how they train, because if you're if you're training a fast twitch person like the slow twitch, they're more likely to get injured. The opposite isn't so much true if someone is slow twitch dominant, but the reality is like a slow twitch person, they're not going to enjoy the type of training that's appropriate for somebody who's fast twitch. Keep in mind, most people are mixed. Okay, so it's pretty unusual, even if you're training, even if you're training athletes. If you're training professional athletes, it's less unusual. But even if you're working with like student athletes, the ones who are really fast twitch dominant, they're not that. That's not common. Same thing on like the slow twitch dominant. There's a lot of things I could say about that, but most people are mixed. So then you just have to kind of look at how they respond in different areas. Even with like the quad, like the vastus lateralis, and most people, I think that tends to be more of a slow twitch muscle, but the VMO tends to be fast twitch. So you need to do different things to make the VMO develop versus the vastus lateralis. We could talk about it for a day and a half. I'm done with this subject for now. If anyone watches this video and has questions, feel free to post. And we'll dig into aspects of this subject as we go. Thanks.